Welcome to the second episode of the Exploring Growth podcast. I'm very glad that you're here. Today, I'm talking about building great teams with very successful business owner and CEO Daryl Dixon of Valentry 360. Let's get into it. Hey, Daryl. Thanks for joining
Happy
me
to be here,
today.
Lee.
I'm really excited about having you on today because we've known each other for a long time. And I know that you love building great teams, and building teams and finding good people is what I want to talk about today. So real quickly, let me introduce you to the audience, kind of in my own terms. Daryl Dixon, CEO at Valentry 360, and has been a family friend for many years. And in fact, that's how we met, through a family connection. Daryl has been a mentor to me when I was getting started in my business, now almost a decade ago. Has helped me think through how to think like a business owner, which has been just super helpful. Learned a lot of things from him, and been my experience that Daryl does a lot of behind the scenes kind of things to help people, just because he genuinely cares about people, like mentoring me. Right? He genuinely cares about people and seeing people succeed, which means he's great at building teams. Right? And I know that if we look back at Daryl's career, it was a long-term career as an executive in the healthcare industry. Over the last decade, became an entrepreneur, starting and successfully selling one of his companies to only roll right into starting his second company, which is now Valentry and Valentry 360, which we talk about a little bit today, where he's the CEO. But the reason I decided to bring him on today is because I've had the good fortune of watching him and a lot of his team behind the scenes grow Valentry. And I've learned a lot about how to approach finding great team players and building up amazing teams. And that he has a unique vantage point because what they offer as a service, or maybe we should say as a solution, is actually placing talented technical professions, right? Professionals in their leadership roles. So I'm really excited to have you here, Daryl, to give our listeners context to some of the ideas that you're going to talk to us about today, and we'll hear from you. Give us a short version of kind of where you came from and what you're doing today with Valentry 360.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, Lee. As you said, early in my career, I spent time with some large companies as a healthcare executive. Actually, the first 20 years of my career, the last 25 years, I've been an entrepreneur. And that's been affiliated with two companies. So I like to think that I have the perspective of both an independent entrepreneur as well as some understanding of what goes on inside corporate America. But I clearly enjoyed being an entrepreneur more than I enjoyed being a corporate executive. The latest venture that we're involved with is a Salesforce consulting business called Valentry 360. Integrated into our consulting practice is a technology staffing business that when we finish a project, typically a Salesforce project, if the client wants to operate their own internal organization, we're able to supply that staff and identify what their needs are and put them on their way so that they're independent and to be able to operate their Salesforce instant effectively on a going forward basis. And so we're growing that business, and that's what I'm involved in.
That's amazing. And I think a unique thing in the market too, because I talk to a lot of different vendors and marketing automation platforms and sales automation, and I talk to a lot of Salesforce people too. And it seems like there are a lot of people out there that can help with the Salesforce side, and in one form or another, whether it's the community aspect, or just getting set up or building in other APIs. And you guys have a unique function in that you're actually integrating it inside their team, which is very integral to growth, right? It's not just providing this sort of cold outside expertise that is, once you're done, then you're done. It seems like you would have a much closer connection with your clients in that way.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because it actually is one of our differentiators. One of the biggest differentiators is we actually start with the business process, typically sales and marketing. And we document that process. We streamline that process before we ever think about applying Salesforce, which is the technology support and solution to the process that's defined. And so we don't start with
Mhm.
Salesforce as a solution. Salesforce is really just the means. The ends is what's actually defined as a new efficient sales process, which leads to much more happy employees, much more efficient
Mhm.
employees, because they're not doing workarounds or silly things to work around the system because the system hasn't stayed up with the current business processes. So that's one of the number one reasons that we're called in and what we're involved in.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I see that a lot, and it seems like the common denominator for problems inside of an organization from a sales and marketing standpoint is the team, right? And so getting in there and getting your hands dirty, and setting the strategy in place, but the system with to how that they're going to operate, and then actually being able to speak that technical language and install that system on the back end to support them, um, is huge. I mean, there's value on every side of that.
It makes the difference. It makes a huge difference in terms of the company's success and scaling, and becoming more profitable, increased sales, and of course, more success.
Yeah, that's right. So I have some questions that I prepared for you, and we'll see where this goes. I just want to have a kind of an open conversation because I know you have a breadth of expertise when it comes to team building, and so I'm gonna, feel free to take this and run with it, rabbit trails and all. Want to add as much value to our audience as possible. So let's start kind of like macro, long term thinking. If a company's thinking about how team building factors into their long-term growth, why is team building, building great teams, why is that important for growth?
Well, in my opinion, relationships determine results. And so those relationships are really key to relationship with clients, relationship with team members, relationship with peers, relationships with regulatory bodies, relationship with vendors and consultants. And so it really starts with those relationships. And so the core of those relationships is trust. So do what you say you're going to do, say what you're going to do, and do what you say you did or are going to do, and do it.
Mhm.
That doesn't exist a lot in this day and age. And it's interesting that it really
So
becomes a
true.
quick differentiator in terms of people knowing about your company, wanting to use your company. And it's really a cornerstone to one of our growth strategies, and that's to land and expand. Um, so if we're able to get a toehold in terms of a small project and then expand to others, that's really based on relationships, which are based on trust. And for that to be able to extend to team members besides just the core group of founders, you've got to very
Mhm.
carefully select those team members that have aligned values to you individually, and very importantly, aligned values to the values you've established for your organization.
Most definitely. I love that. Land and expand. There's so much that you can take from that, really at any place that you're at on that journey of growth. Because I think there's a lot of companies that are in a place where they have a good book of business and the business is coming in, but they're not expanding, right? So I don't know. I think that people, when they hear that, they're going to hear it in different ways. I like that a lot. You know, something that is stood out to me, just in terms of like key team members as you're growing, is, and I've noticed this as I'm working with clients, when they have a very standout COO, it seems like the company typically grows a lot more effectively. And it's been my experience when I see a standout COO, is someone who is, again, team oriented. They're bringing everyone together. They're overseeing lots of different departments and projects within those departments, and they have to be a good team player, right? And so I'm kind of interested to know like where you come from on that side. When you look at a company, what's that key person or a role that really can make or break a great team?
Okay, well, it's actually the way. First of all, I totally agree with what you just said as far as the COO typically, but it really ties back to two people, in my opinion. And early on, small companies, the primary founder generally has to play both these roles, but it's rare that they're actually good at both these roles. And that is
Mhm.
we use the book and the process entrepreneurial operating system from the book Traction by Gino Wickman.
Mhm.
And he talks
Great
about
book.
there having to be a visionary and there having to be an implementer. The COO that
Mhm.
you just described is the implementer. And so he's got to glue the team together, or she's got to glue the team together. She's involved in
Mhm.
selecting the team. A lot of times that COO is trying to keep up with the CEO, who's a visionary, maybe not focused on the
Mhm.
details, but that COO has to be focused on the details. And what's really an art to a successful COO, in my opinion, is building the concept of being a leader, more so being a leader first and a team member second. And so
Mhm.
creating that sense of culture, that sense of value, that sense of trust, the sense of feeling safe and wanting to go to work really falls on
Mhm.
the implementer's shoulders. The implementer also
Mhm.
can be the bad guy. He has to be the bad guy or she has to be the bad guy. Perhaps if somebody's not on the right seat on the bus, or they shouldn't be on the
Mhm.
bus, or they've been selected incorrectly, or they haven't been trained.
Mhm.
There could be all kinds of reasons, but the key is to get the people in the right seats on the bus, which is
Mhm.
talked about in a number of different business books. Um, but
Right.
that implementer really has to do that. But the heart of the matter is leadership in team building. Because if you've got a
Right.
team that will follow you, it's a lot easier to get things done than if you're simply an appointed manager, um, with kind of rote authority.
Most definitely. And as an implementer, you have to be able to have the vision, but then see not only from a skill standpoint, but see it in your team. You have to be able to see, do they have what it takes through and through to bring us, to help us get to this vision. Um, and then just keeping your CEO grounded, and and
Yeah,
keeping everybody
sometimes that's a
rowing
big
in the
job.
same direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, sometimes
Kind
the
of
roles are
so for
reversed.
Oh, okay.
In some cases, the roles can be
S-
reversed.
Tell me what you mean. Okay.
Well, in some cases, you may have a really good detail-oriented operations person that really isn't that great a visionary. In fact, you could have a marketing
Hmm.
executive be a visionary, in my opinion.
Hmm.
It could be the chief operating officer, although typically that visionary isn't necessarily, on a disc profile. They tend to be somebody that's an influencer, somebody that's got a fairly good dose of ego, things that are
Hmm.
kind of the opposite of that detail oriented person that is steady and compliant in terms of the S and the C. And so the point is that
Right.
that function has to exist, whether it's between two people or within the original founder. For a successful business, in my opinion, those two functions have to be happening in a successful organization with a successful team leader and a successful team.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought the DISC assessment. I love psychology and I love behavior. I mean, I could sit and sort of people watch in the business realm all day. I just love why do people make the decisions they make? It baffles me most of the time. But when the DISC assessment came around, it really just solidified a lot of things about behavior for me. It turned on a lot of light bulbs. Um, Talk about the DISC assessment a little bit. How do you utilize that tool in your company, and as you're looking to build up teams?
Well, it's so significant in our company that me and one of my other executives actually formally got certified in DISC assessment. And
Okay.
so the conference room that I'm sitting in right now, you can't see it, but on the opposite wall, there's a very large diagram of the DISC profile for dominant, influential, compliant, and steady. It has the descriptors under each one of those. And there's not a week that goes by that if we're talking about a particular client or a personality, sometimes it could be issues between team members, but it just takes a lot of pressure off, a lot of emotion. It takes the emotion out of a situation to be able to realize that perhaps the way this person is behaving is not personal. It just happens to be what their profile is. And so we're just huge believers on it, to the point that, this diagram that we use in the conference room here is probably about 4 feet by 4 feet. That's how big it is. And then
That's
some of
great.
our folks have it in their offices. But we use it in the selection process of team members. We use it in trying to interface well with clients. We just think it's a cornerstone to the different types of people that we are out there. And it just helps you fit those people together in teams like puzzle pieces. In some cases, when you try to put a square peg in a round hole, the puzzle doesn't come out very nice. So this helps us do it the right way.
I think of the DISC assessment as sort of the small rudder to steer the big ship. It can be those small things that about people that, if understood, can make a big impact. So I'm curious what your DISC profile is.
I'm fairly balanced, although I'm low on the influential I person. I'm an introvert. I'm happy to be
Okay.
behind the scenes. And so, although I do have visionary characteristics, but am fairly detail oriented and steady. So, other than the
Yeah.
I, I'm pretty well rounded between the D, the C, and the S.
Okay. So you can pull on each part of you as it is needed in whatever circumstance.
Yeah, and by the way, everybody is. I mean, it's very easy to do a DISC profile.
Mhm.
You can go online. It's generally 15 or 20 questions, which are shockingly accurate. But it can
Mhm.
vary by where you are in your career, what you're doing. It changes, but it
Mhm.
also changes based on circumstances. But it will clearly pinpoint your predominant, in my opinion, it'll pinpoint your predominant tendencies. And again, if you're hiring a salesperson, a really, top salesperson, you wouldn't want them to have my profile, because you want them to be a
Right.
much higher I in terms of being outgoing
That's
and
right.
enjoying that. And so
That's
consequently,
right.
I've hired salespeople that are high I's, as opposed to me being,
Mhm.
a D and a C.
I have a very weird profile. Mine is an IC.
Okay. That's
So
unusual,
it's
but that's awesome.
I I struggle. I struggle because, part of me is the fun-loving, party-going, like I want to do this, right? Like I want to talk with people and get to know people and develop relationships. And the other part of me is I want all of that to exist inside of a process, and I want to do it in a process-driven way.
That's
So it's a unique tension that I live in.
Well, given your consulting practice, in my opinion, that's a pretty good combination.
I would think so. It is serving me well, so I'll just go with it. Listen, so since we're talking about, in particular, specific roles like the COO, I always, so it's been my experience I work with a lot of COOs because they're the ones that bring me in. They see the problem, and they want to kind of introduce me to their marketing team, and we talk about strategy, systems, different things. But it can be that a lot of the times the CEO is the problem, right? A lot of times I've seen that the CEO is the bottleneck to growth. And so I would say a fair amount of the work that I do is trying to convince the CEO that they need to let go and give more autonomy to the marketing team or the sales team. Again, putting systems in place so that they can work together to have an effect on growth. I'd be curious. Do you see it the same way, or who is the main bottleneck that you see in small companies?
It can certainly be the founder of a small business that can't let go, or you know uh, can't doesn't want to, that really is uncomfortable delegating, which ties into a trust
Hmm.
factor. And I'm not an endorser, I'm not a paid endorser of Traction, but I will tell you, Traction helps address that by creating something called an accountability chart, which defines 3 to 4 primary responsibilities for every person in the organization. Once I think an owner can see what those responsibilities are, and that people, most importantly, via the implementer, are held accountable to
Hmm.
those. Everybody's in agreement. There's no surprises. It's the management becomes unemotional from the standpoint of whether people are doing their job or not doing their job, and so it really becomes a great vehicle for an entrepreneur who's a lot of days working, 16-hour days, and no family time and no quality of life and stressed out and poor health. Um, they
Hmm.
really need to grasp some sort of a system like that to be able to delegate. And when they do that, the team builds, because as long as they're given the authority along with the responsibility and the accountability, that is the formula for success. And so if people
Hmm.
feel that they're trusted, and they've been given the authority, the accountability, and the job duties, that giving of trust is just an incredibly powerful motivator for teams.
Agreed, 100%. So switching gears a little bit more to the practical, um, I want to utilize this platform as a way to let our audience hear great ideas and great wisdom, but also things that they can take and utilize tomorrow in their business. So with that in mind, more of the micro, um, if if you were sitting down with the average small to mid-sized CEO or owner, what's some practical advice on how they should think about practically finding that next hire, or building out a good team? Like, what is it that, is there a place they can go, or um, I mean, we'll get to resources later, but how should they be thinking about that?
Well, as a new business owner in a growing small business, you sort of hit
Mhm.
2 phases. Your first phase includes a circle of individuals that you've either worked with in the past. They may be quasi friends. They may be people that have a skill set you don't have. But the point
Mhm.
is, it's a small circle. And so it may be
Mhm.
4 people, 3 people, 5 people if you're lucky, maybe 6 if you're really lucky. But once you hit that point, you're going to go out to the general public, and you're going to have to identify who is going to be the fit for the organization. And so, and the core of that relationship is trust. Those first 3, 4, 5, 6 people, you've worked with them. You've got trust between all of you. And so you work at a completely different level. If you stop there, you'll always be a small business, and you will not grow. So you have to learn to be able
Mhm.
to go over to that next phase. And so, in going on to that next phase, you start to have to use tools to identify people that have similar values. And again, going back to a well-defined position, there's a variety
Mhm.
of recruiting efforts, but in terms of kind of thinking about interviewing one of these candidates,
Mhm.
there's some characteristics I look for when I interview a candidate. One is that are they selfless? In other words, is it an interview? An interview is supposed to be about the candidate, but is it a me candidate versus a we candidate? And you can very quickly,
Mhm.
as you listen to the stories of their success and what they've done, they'll either talk about their teams and their success of the team, or they'll talk about them and the
Mhm.
success of themselves. Needless to say, the latter is of concern if you really want to have a team player and be part of a working team. The other thing I look for is an extended involvement in some sort of organization of mission. It could be the Boy
Mhm.
Scouts, the Girl Scouts. They could have gone to Greek school, Jewish school, parochial school, Catholic school. It doesn't matter to me. But to see them involved with some kind of an organization that's associated with a mission, it could be the YMCA. But it's
I
got
love that.
there's a human side to them that is more than
Mhm.
just getting ahead, just getting good grades, just getting a good job, just making money. Um, And in some cases, people have spent, their entire grade school and even high school years, affiliated with organizations that I think help round them out. That we all need to help each other, and we need to love our fellow man. And so it doesn't mean that people are that way. And certainly people don't have to be affiliated with any of those to be altruistic or the right candidate. But it just gives you a clue as to what may be there that may otherwise not. Another thing that's important is people that have made commitments beyond the normal, which could be associated with music, an instrument, gymnastics. But the point is, every day after school for multiple years, they had to come home and they had to do work above and beyond their homework and schooling, which takes commitment and grit to stay through to that process. And people that have really excelled to a high level, I have that much more admiration for, that they've got the stick-to-itiveness and grit to take to take what's going to come our way relative to the challenges of growing and starting a business. The last thing I
Those are all
the
great.
last thing I would just
Keep going.
mention is I like to ask about their mentors. It's music to my ears when I hear that their mentors are their parents or a parent. I think that's really, it's brave for the candidate to say that, because I don't think it's a particularly positive or courageous thing to say as a young man. My dad is my mentor, or my mom is my mentor. I find it very positive, actually. But I love to hear if their mentor is a community leader. It could be a church leader, again, some affiliated with some sort of a mission-oriented person. I think, again, that gives insight. It could be a coach too. I mean, there's all kinds of sport coaches that are mentors. But when you dig a little deeper and find out why they're a mentor, you'll immediately understand whether they what they learned from that mentor, and you're able to, you'll get a sense of their values based on what they tell you they learned from the mentors.
Most definitely. Those are all great pillars to take into interviewing people that you don't know. Right? You're meeting these people for the first time and looking at a piece of paper, and how do you ascertain that this person is a quality person that would make up a good team? Right? Those are great ways to think about it. And I love the missional one, because what is probably going to happen by osmosis is that they're going to bring that mission thinking to the company, which probably translates to loyalty. I mean, maybe there's not a direct connect, but to me, that's what it says is loyalty. We're actually are looking side by side at each other. We're all moving ahead the same, because they've done it somewhere else. I love that. That's powerful.
Yeah. The last thing I would just mention, there was an article that was actually one of my business colleagues, one of the executives here at Valentry, sent this article to me within the last 2 months, actually. It was an article from Inc. magazine, and the subject is Warren Buffett: integrity is the top trait to look for in a job candidate. And there's 4 questions that apparently he uses in interviewing candidates, which we love, because I think trust is the number one. Trust and integrity is the number one characteristics that you need to have in a true successful team member, which translates also ultimately to a team leader. And I'll just read these real quickly, but would you be willing to tell a white lie to help us out? That's a really, when you're sitting there looking at the potential hiring manager, and then they take it one step further, is if the situation called for it, would you ever lie on my personal behalf? The other one is tell me a story of you, but the things you tell me can't be on your resume. So, they could have worked with somebody to come up with this world-class resume, but now all of a sudden they're going to have to describe themselves in terms outside their resume.
That's right.
And the other one, which is pretty common, is what are the characteristics exhibited by the best boss you've ever had? And again, what the answer to that question is, you're looking for things like honesty, integrity, team building, leadership. If they've experienced that, they know what they're looking for. And it's interesting, the latest candidates that we've hired here at Valentry, what's interesting to me is they are looking for they're young people. They have experience with multiple work environments, their early career work environments, but they know that they're looking for a positive environment where they're supported, cared about, that it's a trusting environment, that they don't
Hmm.
that you know that they will be supported in terms of their growth and their careers, and that is becoming more and more a requirement of candidates that we're interviewing for our company.
That's great. And it's such a nice thing for the right person to fit a culture like that and know that they have some security there, right?
That's
To
what,
know, okay, I can put my head down and go to work, and everyone else here is doing the same thing, and I don't have to worry about what my boss is thinking about me or my paycheck or all these sort of external things that can become a
yep.
weight. That security allows people to really do their
It
best
is,
work.
because the other one that we work really, really hard to not have, and this is particularly true on the staffing side of our business, is most staffing organizations are highly competitive. They're cutthroat inside the organizations,
Hmm.
and we don't let that happen. And so they are pleasantly surprised that there certainly is the reporting of results of individuals' wins. And
Hmm.
what I still love to
Hmm.
this day is every time there's a deal done by the company, there's a whole raft of congratulatory emails to other team members. We never made that part of the policy of the company, but it just happens.
Yeah.
And so every time a deal's announced, there's like 10 internal emails that I see in terms of,
Yeah.
congratulations
That's
that are
so awesome.
passed on between the team members. And I think that's unique.
It's so rewarding, I'm sure, to lead a company their culture has sort of formed on its own,
Sure.
right? Like you've done a lot of this heavy lifting to put the right people in place so that people can succeed and be fulfilled in their job. But when you see stuff like that happen, it's got to be super fulfilling for you because as you're growing your business, the goal is to grow it and make a profit and potentially sell it at some point, whatever the goal is, right? Because it's for profit, but along the way, to have that part to be part of it is pretty
Yeah,
substantial.
in fact, it reminds me of another, the leader of our Salesforce practice, in his last staff meeting with our consultants. I had no idea he was going to do this, but he took it upon himself to take the four values of our company: people first, trust, teamwork, and innovation. And what he did in the staff meeting is he created a PowerPoint slide for each person that he chose to represent each one of those values for the last month. He then featured
That's
what
great.
that individual person did, because there were four different people identified for these four different values. And now in the next
Hmm.
staff meeting, it's their responsibility to identify somebody in the organization that they will pass that or pay it forward to
Hmm.
in the next staff meeting, as to why they're recommending that person, or calling out that person
Hmm.
relative to their behavior and approach. And so it was really a novel way
That's so
we
great.
call it taking the values off the wall, and actually
Hmm.
applying those. We speak about our values in each one of our meetings, and every company has values on the wall, but I'm not sure every company takes them off the wall. And it's really a core to the team building and team relationship and culture of our company.
That reminds me of being a parent, and with the kids, I'd say, do you love your sister? And my son would say yes, and I'd say, well, why? Right? And they have to answer the question, so they have to think about it. They got to think, well, because she's smart or she's funny or she helped her friend out the other
Yeah.
day. I mean, that's a professional environment doing a similar thing where you actually have to spend some time thinking about what you think about that
Yeah,
person.
and also what you think about that value. So the biggest thing is,
That's right.
and the other thing is,
That's
we
right.
encourage our salespeople and our recruiters and our consultants to talk about the fact that we're a values-based company. And we have found that the
Hmm.
more we talk about it, and I know it's cliche, it's not, you're not going to read
Hmm.
about it probably in the next Harvard Business Review article. But the reality is, if you talk about it, what you're doing is you're really setting yourself up to be held accountable to it. And that's where I think
That's right.
that's where candidates and clients find out that we're different, and that is that we're
Mhm.
prepared to be held to, in terms of accountability to those values, based on the fact that we're going to disclose them, and we welcome that responsibility to be held to those values.
That's so interesting because what that makes me think of is this idea I always have in mind that I'll share it with typically marketing teams that I'll work with. Um, and it's this idea of like, you're here in this role and you may not always be here in this role, but don't you want to grow personally, right? As you're here, if you are learning, educating yourself, building skills, advancing in your knowledge and, the way that you look at your role and how it impacts the company, you know, typically it's, that kind of person that's looking for that advice is not going to be in a culture like you're describing, right? Because it's not happening naturally. But don't you want to grow personally? Because if you seek to grow personally, that's going to lift the tide. The tide's going to lift the boat of the company. You're going to be, naturally, pouring back into the company, and the company benefits. And so I think that's so interesting how that works. That, as we're talking about exploring growth for company growth, right? Um, Along the way, we're growing personally, and the accountability aspect of that is the key. Because if there's accountability, that can be a little bit there can be a little bit of a tension there, because if you're not used to having that accountability, it's going to feel like not so great. But whenever you embrace it and you realize, oh no, we're all really personally trying to grow, like what your sales force person was doing, that's good. It's going to naturally one to another say, oh, this accountability thing is a good thing.
But the other thing, you really struck a nerve in terms of people that want to grow. A great interview question is to ask them what the last book was that they read. We try to be an
Right.
organization of lifelong learners, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
talking about of books and trading of books and ideas, and oh, you got to read this one,
Hmm.
and you can hear the buzz in the organization, and you know that that's a growing, learning organization, and that's always healthy.
Completely. And to that point, let's talk about resources. What are some books or podcasts or other resources that you listen to or have learned from in the past that you could recommend for other business owners to go and consume?
Well, I've obviously already talked about traction. The other thing is,
Mhm.
unfortunately, in my career, I was probably close to 30 years old before I was introduced to a very old book, but a very successful book, and that's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's been
Mm-hmm.
republished, I don't know how many times, and the stories are a little dated, but the fundamental concepts in terms of the importance of using people's names, spelling their name correctly, saying their name
Hmm.
correctly, the principles in that book are just
Hmm.
ageless. And so I just we had two new employees start last week. They came to their first
Hmm.
level 10 meeting, which is part of Traction. And as part of that, I handed out Traction books, and I handed out How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I said, I wish somebody had given, this book to me when I was your age.
Yeah.
The other one that's been as
Great.
particularly influential for us is uh, Stephen Covey, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Coincidentally, we've
Hmm.
actually been covering that this week. In each one of our morning meetings, we do this little um, talk on values or things that we want to inspire
Hmm.
to. And for the last week and this week, we've actually been going through those seven habits. Just a quick reminder of what they are, why it's important. Again, these are all kind of mom and apple pie things that whether you're in marketing
Hmm.
or sales or operations or
Hmm.
leadership or janitorial, it doesn't matter. Everybody can
Hmm.
use these principles based on their brand and how they interface with their peers and the client organization. So those are some old fashioned standby, no, not any whiz
Yeah.
bang stuff, but just really hardcore um, messages that, again, I think trust and integrity you'll find is the root of each one of those books and the success of each one of those processes.
Well, as they say in music, everything's a sample. and it's a sample of something prior. So I look at those two books as sort of that way, even though Traction's a relatively newer book. You really covered this sort of trust building, relationship people oriented book, or resource, and then a operational, systems oriented book. And I'm privy to that. I mean, given my DISC assessment, I'm a IC, so I'm people and process, right? So I love when those two things come together. So I definitely think those are great books, and those ageless books are sometimes the
Yeah.
best.
The other thing I'd be remiss in not mentioning is Joe Peachey from Peachey and Peachey has been a huge influence on our organization in terms of putting together a formal sales process, which we didn't have. And quite frankly, I didn't have for the majority of my career. And so putting together what's called a formal value proposition, being able to articulate that very quickly to a customer has really been a game changer in terms of our organization. He has a podcast and sales training organization, and it's really had a profound impact on me personally as well as our organization.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And I need to reach out to Joe, have him on here, because he's got a lot of hard hitting advice that people can take and utilize day one. So that's a good recommendation. Okay, last question before I let you go. If you could change the mind of a small or growing company about anything, doesn't have to be teams, what would it be?
Well, again, it's easy to preach.
Yes.
I did what I'm going to advise fellow business owners and entrepreneurs not to do, and that is, I think that one of the biggest mistakes is to try to be all things to all people, and it's not. That's not the reason that you're trying to be all things to all people. Let's face it, the reason you're trying to be all things to all people is to make enough cash to come into the company to make sure your company
That's
survives. Right. And so there's a really
right.
delicate balance between having enough products to sell and maintain cash flow and business, but keeping it limited enough that your resources and team aren't spread so thin that you're really not effective at anything. And so the narrower it can be, I think, the better. And then also balancing out what is your market. If the market's too small and the scope is too narrow, your business is going to be much more at risk than if the market's a little broader and you've got diversification. Diversification is important in all aspects of the business, but it's that inevitable slippery slope that I have slipped down many times, to be honest, and that is trying to do too many things and be all things to all people.
Well, sometimes it's, and again, I think as you're sort of alluding to, there's people listening to this right now that may be doing that and they're hating that they're doing it because they know they're doing it. But, cash flow is important. And if you have a vision for where you're headed and you're headed that direction, well, then continue going, but just, try to get out of that game. I've been down that road too, and it's not fun because, to the point of hiring good teammates, you have someone doing too many things and they're not properly utilized and they're not fulfilled.
Right. That's right. And by the way, it's hard to deliver good customer service. And so if you're not careful, it's easy to get into a cycle of failure. So yes, you want to be persistent by all means. But the other thing I would just say, one last thing in terms of that persistence, is to make sure you're listening to the market and that you are listening to what the market wants to buy as opposed to being driven by what you as the entrepreneur want to sell. There's a difference.
Yes, there's a big difference.
So,
thanks, right. Daryl. It's been great, and great catching up with you. Appreciate all your wisdom, and I expect to fully have you back in another 10 or 15 episodes or so. This is such a broad topic. We could get off on a rabbit trail talking about one thing. So I'd love to have you back.
Hopefully it was helpful.
All right. Thanks. Thank you. Hey, I really appreciate you tuning into this episode of Exploring Growth. I'm trying to get this in the hands of as many growing businesses as possible so they can take this practical wisdom and deploy it in their companies or with their teams. If you're getting some value out of this show and know someone who should listen as well, would you consider sharing it with them or leave a positive review on the platform in which you're listening or watching? YouTube audience, leave a comment below with something you liked or your perspective on what we discussed. I'm grateful for everyone that tunes in every week. Let's keep exploring.